Turn up your mics. It's the C word.
Hello and welcome. You are listening to the C word, where we explore current affairs and culture. I am your host, Hina, and today we kick off episode 3 in our series with Breeder Steve, a legend in the world of cannabis. For anyone like myself, who is new to the cannabis community, Breeder Steve's background includes advising government and pioneering in cannabis genetics. So without further ado, let's give a warm welcome to our special guest in our special Christmas edition of the C Word, Breeder Steve. Hello.
Hi, Hina. Thanks for having me. And Merry Christmas to you.
Merry Christmas. How have you been spending the holiday season?
It's just straight up with family. We meet up with a lot of my family. We always go somewhere different. And that'll be the New Year's hit, and then back to the grind in January. This is a year that I haven't had to travel as much as a lot in previous years, and it's pretty epic around here, especially the early winter like this, because it's not biting cold like it gets in January and that often. January, February can be just biting cold, but often December it's just dumping snow. So there's, fresh powdering all the time, and the temperatures are still comfortable, It's okay, I like getting up in the hills. It's like, -8, -10, -6, that's fine.
Oh my
but if
goodness.
it's like 20, it's not fun anymore. -24. In the summer, there's lakes and really nice summer things to do, golf and vineyards. And I don't golf much. I didn't even go once this year. Some years I would do a bit more, but I'm more into water sports. I'd rather be just floating on the water, even just on an air mattress. I mean, I just love being in the water even more than on it. It's nice to be out on boats, but boy, I'm just happy being in the water, So
Do you enjoy diving or snorkeling?
I've been snorkeling in a while in the last year. I haven't been diving in a long time. And I used to have a place right on the ocean and had all my own diving equipment and, dry suits and PCs and tanks. And I used to go all the time and just, grab dinner. But it's been a long time since I lived on the coast. I do miss the ocean for sure.
Is it easy to grow on the coast? Or is it obviously outdoors, the salt, the air,
Well, the Pacific Northwest is, a notoriously poor place for outdoor growing. And that's why indoor growing was invented in Seattle, And I think what had happened was, the hippies in California were growing outside, getting squeezed out. Prices were going up. They moved to Oregon. Lots of them did it. Prices are going up. They moved to Washington because the further up you went, the cheaper the farms were in the land to get started. And so people, are renting. Lots of people lease or rent a farm to start with, and it's easier to, move a lot if you do that. If you like to move around and plant in different places, it's better to lease a farm than buy one, right? So anyway, they eventually spread north, but then they realized as they were getting up into Washington, it was really, hit or miss to finish any good outdoor, especially when a lot of the stuff they were growing had originated in Mexico or Colombia, got crossed with Afghans eventually to hurry it up a little bit. But the Afghans not good in the wet weather, whereas the narrow leaf plants from the humid tropics, I've still got one outside. I kid you not. It's a dog haze. It's called dog haze. It was Chem 91 crossed with old timer haze, and that was gifted to me by a breeder named Scallywag. So Scallywag sent me some cuts to try out this year, and I still have some of the dog haze out there. It's incredible. So a lot of the rage today is for, fresh frozen extracts. So whether they're, live rosin, which really can smell like the fresh plant, like you're capturing the fresh essence of it. You can do the same with hydrocarbons as well. But in Canada, you're not allowed to do hydrocarbons for personal use because people are blowing up apartments and stupid shit, Um, anyways, they're allowed to do without solvents. So that's why taking the fresh pot, taking the fresh hash from it, freeze drying it, and then squishing it for rosin. Some people would freeze dry the weed, then make the hash, and then do it. But you can kind of do it either way. You can take fresh pot, spin it in ice and water, or get it really cold enough to snap all the fresh gland heads off dry using dry ice or something. But I find liquid nitrogen almost too much. I find it like gives them like a freezer burn to the hash taste. But I've played with it, and there's people that do it and do a good job with it. So each to their own. There's a lot of ways to do it. But either way, whatever you do to make that hash, then you want to press it at a low temperature for rosin. And then you have really the essence of the plant, without all the fibers, significantly less wax, all the parts of the plant that aren't cannabinoids and volatile aromas, the flavors and aroma compounds that, plants made up of fiber and wax and all kinds of other things. So if you're just smoking crude flower, raw flower, that's you burning everything. And that's often what most people that don't like the smell of weed, that's what they don't like. They don't like that ropey, burning rope smell. Sometimes I think they associate it with. But once it's an extract, and it's basically vaporized, not combusted, because the way you consume it. And then you're just vaporizing the essence of the plant. Without the combustion, you don't have the same amount. You don't have carcinogens like that, It's very carcinogenic to combust stuff. Everything you're inhaling from that is dangerous, or a lot of what you're inhaling. But when the vapors themselves of just the essence of the plant, it's like an essential oil of cannabis, right? And it can be varietal. They're quite different. They'll have very different characteristics. And you'll notice you'll be drawn to some more than others. But on the other hand, there's absolutely personal choice.
Turn up your mics. It's the C word.
Wine, I find them to be a parallel universe. That's why I refer to them a lot. It's a parallel universe of growing and crafting flavorful intoxicants, because it's really, there's so much similarities to it. And you get the terroir if you're growing in the ground somewhere, or if you're blending your own soil or using your own compost like I do in my backyard, in my pots, then you build your own terroir that way, So you really influence the character of the cannabis by how it's grown. So it's pretty much half genetic and half environment. So if you're growing grapes or cannabis on a lot of limestone or adding a lot of lime, like dolomitic lime, you get more sweetness in grapes and in cannabis. So there's a lot of parallels, and you can learn so much from anywhere. So, but I found lots of my cannabis knowledge transferred well to making wine, and vice versa. I sort of felt like I was doing a sabbatical in wine for 15 years. But then when I really was back to cannabis, I was able to bring a whole lot of what I learned back with me, So I'm extra keen to apply it and, keep developing really fun commercial opportunities. And whether they're in the medical realm or the adult use realm, there's different ways to approach them both, like in the medical, essentially, like if you really want to go pharmaceutical cannabis, it's really down to isolates, right? So you're a molecule farmer because Western medicine isn't about whole plant medicine. Western medicine's about quantifying isolates and titrating dosages exactly and running clinical trials and all that. So they need to have, you know, product that's to the highest standards and certifications. And you can grow fantastic cannabis without doing all that. But if you want to sell, you know, an API, an active pharmaceutical ingredient to a pharmaceutical company, then you have to have the accreditations from seed to oil, right? Seed to soil to oil. So it's a different game. They're both interesting to play, you know? I mean, obviously it's more fun just to have the least possibly regulated and just have it as, you know, a beautiful thing that should be in farmers' gardens everywhere, and they can sell it at the end of their driveway for all I care. I mean, that would be just beautiful if people could do it openly in farmers' markets, and that's essentially, you know, people won't give the state any peace until they do. You know, there's always going to be people pushing like, this is ridiculous, you know, from straight up prohibition to kind of pseudo prohibition, where it's like so heavily regulated that only a couple of, you know, you get a small oligarchy of producers or something. In the UK, it's been bad for that, but it's especially acute in the cannabis industries. We've seen in many places that there's a fair bit of favoritism, you know, to put it nicely, that it, when the government steals your rights and then sells them back to the highest bidder, it's not a good scene, you know, and you have regulatory capture after that too. And they're going to say, put up the barriers behind us, make it harder to enter, and or just the fact that they get those first mover advantages sometimes too. But regardless, I think there's always going to be room for improvement when it comes to regulation, because the ultimate regulation is none. You know, just all they have to do is go back to the day before they made it illegal. They don't have to make some phone book of regulations to fix what they've done. They just have to undo what they've done. That's it. It's echinacea, you know, leave it alone. What do you care if people sell echinacea at the end of their driveway? Nobody cares, you know? I don't want to sell weed at the end of my driveway. I want to breed it as a hobby or breed it for the joy of, you know, competition and getting stuff out there. It's fun to do, you know, so that's why, I mean, you can choose what you do to a large degree, right? You've got some choice. And I think if you do something that you're really passionate about and that you really enjoy, you know, as cliche as it is, but you say, if you do what you love, you never work a day in your life, right? So it's true. If you're doing what you're loving, you know, you might be busting ass and doing long hours and all that. And I did when I was younger, but now I'm a little more of a remote grower. So I help get partnerships set up in different places, but the local partner, they'll send me pictures or questions as they need to. After a few years, I hardly, you know, there's not a lot of oversight required because they've been doing it with you for so long. So, my friends in Thailand, when they were not growers when they started 4 years ago, and she's a fantastic grower now, you know, and she learned on her own, you know, like I was only there once or twice a year, and I can give you advice as much as I can, but it's not the same if you're not there, right? So she really learned on her own, and with some good pointers, hopefully, but either way, there's never a single question in the last year or so, like, oh, what should I do about this or that? They got it. Everything looks good. They send me pictures. It looks dynamite. I mean, I can't tell them what to do. They're already doing it right, you know? So that's awesome. And then I think, okay, well, now I've got time to get another place rolling, you know? Because off the get-go, there might be a lot of involvement with design and all that, you know? But once it's once it's underway and trialed and happening and you've established your protocols, or your SOPs.
Turn up your mics. It's the C word.
There hasn't been a lot of effort put into breeding tropical cannabis in a long time, I think. There hasn't been nearly the focus on that is for short season types, let's say, So the majority of, the modern market is going to be for short season types that are going to finish in temperate climates or indoors. But the part of that is because it was really widely prohibited and the imports dried up. It was easier to grow some in your closet than get a bale sent from Colombia, So it was easier just to grow it at home for a lot of people. So the import market of cannabis, it didn't totally go away, but it changed a lot from used to be the dominant form, and now it was not the dominant form, let's say. But there's been lots of consumption of cannabis around the equatorial zones throughout the world, and I think the smoking of it even started in West Africa. I think the plant was consumed orally before that, like as food or beverages. And then the West Africans, apparently, according to one white paper I was reading, they are the ones that started burning it in the pipe, And that's interesting.
What would happen if you tried something new within a pipe? Because you get those
most tobacco pipes. Go ahead. What are you saying with this one?
No, just can it only be smoked in a certain way? So, for example, what was it, terp slurper or the
slurper?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, the terp slurpers for extracts. I like the cold start banger the most for extracts. I prefer my cold start banger, but there's various bangers you can use in dabbing, but for burning flower in a pipe or smoking hash in a pipe, they're fairly compatible. Like any pipe that's handy will do, Obviously, there's ones that are more geared towards cannabis smokers. It might be like on a bong bowl.
So you can mix. You wouldn't.
A lot of people mix it. I don't mix grass. I don't mix grass and tobacco, but for many, many years,
that can't be good.
I've mixed hash and tobacco. And I don't do it as much anymore. But what you said is absolutely right, is because cannabis is a bronchodilator. So it carries tobacco further and deeper into your lungs than it would go if you were smoking plain tobacco. It does less damage to your lungs than smoking tobacco mixed with cannabis. And knowing that, I still will, if somebody's visiting me and they have tobacco, I won't buy it and keep it in the house. But if somebody's visiting me and has tobacco, I've got hash that I cannot wait to put into a hash and cigarette, hash tobacco joint. Hash backy. I absolutely love those. I love them way too much. And I smoked way too many of them earlier in my life, and I've had to cut it out because I thought the tobacco was just getting too harsh on my lungs. But I absolutely savor the flavor, especially if it's a decent tobacco. I used to get this nice organic one. Plus, I used to grow my own tobacco too. So I would have the tobacco that I grew. I would usually put that in a water pipe with hash. So I quite enjoyed that. Yeah. But I know that it's bad for your health. On the other hand, when I've been in foreign lands, sometimes if I was making oil, just taking the pack of cigarettes like Marlboros or whatever, and then I would have, once I've made the oil, I'll put like a spoonful or two of alcohol back in just to rinse down all the oil and clean up the jar and whatnot. And then you get this kind of, aliquot there. And then I would just stick in the pack of cigarettes. Again, I'd just take them all out in my hand and put them into the jar so that they had capillary action and just suck it all up. And then I'd just take them out and spread them out. And they let them dry out, and the high alcohol evaporates pretty quick, especially if you got them where there's some wind or a little sun or something. They'll be dry in no time. And then I put them all back in the pack. So then when I'm going around places maybe where it's illegal to smoke weed and you stand out as a foreigner anyway, if you're just smoking some cigarettes that look like they got wet, they don't have a huge smell. If it was distillate oil, then there's not really a huge smell. It's just a little different, like kind of like when you smell cigarettes from another country and you know it's a cigarette, but it just smells a little different. And that's what these were like, but they were so strong, so I made a point of doing these oiled cigarettes. But of course, if you smoke a lot of them, your lungs just feel trash because the oil it opens your lungs up, brings the tobacco in deeper than normally. But so it's a bad habit.
Turn up your mics. It's the C word.
Age of cannabis was really interesting. Does it change over time?
Once you've had all the oxidation and a lot of the THC has converted to CBN, now it's not the weed that makes you want to get up and dance and giggle. It's the weed that makes you want to fall asleep on the couch, So it goes from being an energizing stimulant, to being an analgesic sedative that, eases your muscles. A lot of people want that. They want to feel their body relaxed, like a internal massage, I say it's the opium of cannabinoids. The CBN is, and when people ask doctors for cannabis, the first thing they want it for is pain relief. And the second thing they want it for is to help them sleep. And some people say CBD helps them sleep, and some people say, it's a placebo. I don't really notice that. Whatever works for you is only up to you. You're the only one that can tell if it works or not. I can't tell you for sure that works. But I can say CBN, I definitely think is pretty widely known to be a very relaxing, but it slows you down, So it doesn't, fresh THCA, and you hit that, and especially with bright terpene profiles that are, strong levels of terpene, you feel something just from the terps, So, and they'll modulate the type of high too. So whether, some of them you'll find more anxiety inducing, it's not just the THC, but it's what's coming with it to steer it, We have endocannabinoid systems, that we're born with, which isn't largely studied in a lot of medical schools, but it's pretty well accepted by those who studied it. And we have the EC1 and EC2 receptors, at least, and THC works on one and CBD works on the other.
It's really interesting because what I think you've actually highlighted the marketing side of cannabis. If I wanted to grow and if I knew who my market was, so for example, if it was a 20 to 31-year-old market, or if I were looking after, I don't know, veterans, I would probably choose cannabis according to the effect, like you just said.
True. And I think that's pretty widely accepted that the limonene dominant ones give a more social high, and ones that are higher in linalool, which is like in lavender, those are more just soothing,
Turn up your mics. It's the C word.
There is something quite open about the culture, I think, which is quite nice. It's not like, it doesn't seem like it would work very well if you were all gloved up and, had a hat on and made it too sanitized.
And in the legal market in Canada, that's how it is. They're all wearing bunny suits and latex gloves and hairnets and stuff and masks. You can't even breathe. They can't have them breathing on the weed because when that goes through for microbial testing, your breath would have contaminated it. Because the
medicinal,
cutoff, yeah,
the foods.
well, for any in Canada, for the adult use market or medicinal market, they have the same cannabis standards. They are allowed, the cutoff level is you have to be less than 50,000 CFUs per gram. So if you took a gram of weed and plated it, you'd have to get less than 50,000 colony forming units, you know? So it sounds like, oh my God, it sounds like 50,000 is a lot, but it's, we're talking,
Quite low.
yeah, it's pretty tight. A lot of the cannabis has to be irradiated to kill it, which doesn't take it, just leaves the dead stuff. So they send moldy weed, even has been sent there to, I don't think they can get away with that much anymore, but people were buying weed that had mildew in it and taking pictures of it. And they're like, okay, but it's in it because it's been irradiated. So it's harmless. It's just dead mildew. I mean, if you're buying weed and it's got dead mildew on it, you'd probably want to switch brands, That's just not quality work, So in Canada and in Europe, I'm sure a lot of the cannabis in the legal markets is irradiated. And some people say it does nothing to it. Some people say it hurts it. I am kind of without an opinion because but it doesn't sound nice, I don't know, but I've never tried myself side by side, so I have no opinion.
Is that similar to what you were saying about hydrocarbons, utilizing the
Well,
process?
if you're using hydrocarbons, you can get a license for in Canada if you're a commercial extractor. And then you can use a blend. You can use straight butane. You could use straight propane. I think sort of the top mix is 70% butane, 30% propane. And then they target different parts of the oil, basically. The propane seems to capture more terps, the butane more cannabinoids. It's my understanding of it. I know guys that are full-time hydrocarbon extractors, they know infinitely more about it than I do. But if the gas has to be super, super clean, or it can leave some residual taste in the product, and also if it's extracted at room temperature, say, he'll pick up too much waxes and still grab other things that you don't want. So some people would solve that by winterizing it, but then you have to cook off if they winterize it with alcohol, they have to cook off the alcohol, which is high enough boiling point that it cooks off a lot of terps. So you got to capture those with a cold trap and separate and sort of fraction the oil off that way. But what I've found is, and I know some expert guys that do this as well on a professional level, but to keep the hydrocarbon extraction extremely cold, both before and after. Like all your gas is in the freezer, all your flour's in the freezer, all your equipment's frozen, and then you pack it and run it, even with additional chiller tubes in it, I've seen. And then if you can keep it in solution afterwards, and you're in a cold environment, because like the boiling point of those things is like minus 200 and something, right? So it wants to evaporate instantaneously. But if you do it when it's really cold and take it outside while it's in the liquid still, it can stay in that hydrocarbon liquid and it'll start to flocculate wax in that. And then you can pour it through coffee filters and while it's still a liquid, and then it never has to get cooked off, it just evaporates pretty quickly. So if it's super cold out, it's not evaporating as fast. So I might even take some water from my hot tub, which is outside, and put it in a bowl and then put the one bowl in it to keep just lightly warming it up, not cooking it off, but just lightly warming it up to get it to cook off slowly. And then once it's to the consistency of like maple syrup, basically, you'd put it in a jar and cap it off and then burp that for a couple days and just keep it somewhere still and dark and a little bit warm. And it'll just form crystals, and it'll keep this huge terpene fraction, and you'll have really, really distinct terpene. And even if you do it soon enough, even that oil won't really have much in the way of cannabinoids in it, because all the crystals will drop out. So you'll have the acetate analog of THCA. And those are, they're crystals. And if you separate them, you could totally separate them if you wanted to, but it's generally we like to stir them up and use them together. But I have even siphoned off terps from jars like that where the terps had separated nicely, but there was maybe a real abundance of them, and put that into like vape cartridges where you can just have hits that just have the flavor of the cannabis, but they're not really strong because you've precipitated the cannabinoids out of it, right? So you're just getting, you could have like these varietal flavored vapes where you're just hitting terps, and those are kind of fun to have. And they, as long as you tested it, they would be literally legal anywhere in the country or in the world as long as the THC is non-existent. So you'd have to have really knocked out all the THC, but you could theoretically travel with just terps in cartridges, and you're just vaporizing a plant essence minus the cannabinoids. Because terpenes are legal everywhere. There's nowhere that'd be illegal to have. Even cannabis-derived terpenes aren't a controlled product in Japan, for example, whereas cannabis is highly illegal. But you could have a shop in Shinjuku Station selling cannabis terpenes. As long as there's no cannabinoids in them, nobody could say anything, So there's a million things to do that haven't been done, but there's just endless, and and I should even not assume that it hasn't been done. Maybe somebody has done it. I don't know. But I know I've seen a few other people make like terp-only carts for joy. Like,
do you think that's where technology has been quite good? Because if you have been growing it, then it's just easier to communicate all these great ideas without.
Yeah, the thing is, in Canada at least, it's illegal to do it at home with any solvents because of the explosive factor. So people have blown up places and, oil explosions blowing up houses and crazy stuff. So if some fool started doing that in an apartment building, you imagine, you don't want some guy with like playing with propane in the next apartment to you. If you're doing it in a lab that's been built for it, it's a lot safer. Or if you're doing it straight up outside, you could just have a roof over and just be doing it outside because it would never explode outside, highly unlikely, let's say. But you can do it solventless anyway, and you can make fantastic rosin solventless, so you don't need to use solvents to make fantastic extracts. And so most people now have gotten away from using solvents. The vast majority of people make solventless now. And it's just more appreciated overall. There's still fans of hydrocarbon, and I understand that. And also, I know a lot of people that like solventless say, well, hydrocarbon always has this kind of plasticky taste at the end and stuff. But the truth is, if it's made super well with really clean gas and made really cold and all the waxes are filtered out and stuff, it tastes totally clean. You can cook that dry and it doesn't taste like plastic, But if you have some that wasn't done as well with, or lesser quality gas, then it's going to have funky taste, So people are overall better off with the solventless, The solventless methods only get about 70% of the return from what's available. So if you're on a home scale, you might not care. You might say 70%. I've got tons, and it's going to take me years to smoke this. I'm just going to throw the weed in my compost. And I do that all the time. I throw perfectly, weed that I could definitely still salvage for something. I put in my compost. I've got lots. I'm not selling it. So the efficiency doesn't even matter anymore and you're not dealing with big enough quantities that it would matter, but if you're dealing in commercial quantities, then it really makes a difference because you're throwing out a huge amount. And if the end goal is a pharmaceutical isolate, it's like mining gold and not using the fines, You might as well get through the fines as well. So somebody will later, but I just love that a huge amount of my compost that I make, where I just grow my personal weed around my pool in the summer. It's from all my kitchen stuff, coffee grounds and egg shells and avocado peels and asparagus pieces and whatever, all that stuff. But also, it's all my fan leaves. Like when I clean up those big plants that I grow, I'll strip off all the leaves, pack them in the compost. So half of that compost is cannabis already. And even I chop up the medium to use, chop up the stalks as medium. So I like to recycle that herb into itself. It's really fun. And even the water you're using to water the plant. I've been a slack bastard in using tap water through the hose lately, and I notice a difference because for many times, I grow with pure pond water, or sweet water from an aquarium or a pond, and that rich living water makes better tasting grass than tap water. So there's more life in it. I have tons of life in my soil. It comes right around, and don't always, but I usually I try and let the tap water sit out for a day before I use it because I don't want to be pouring the chlorine in, right? So if you let it sit out for a day, it's okay, but it's not the same as like having turtles and fish and birds living in it either. So when you pump that water in, boy, oh boy, that's all you need, honestly. If you have a decent little koi pond in your backyard, you can have a little float valve on it that just lets in more water. That pond will stay at a constant level, and you could have mesh at the bottom. Like if you have a matrix built there, a screen, gravel on it, and you could have the pump sucked from the bottom. So all the water that settled down, the finest stuff will go through the gravel filter, the gravel layer and everything. And that's the dirty water. You're pulling out the bottom of that pond for your garden. And you pull that out for your garden, and you will find yourself not needing fertilizer. That'll be it. It can be that easy. Yeah, just pump your pond water into your garden. You can do subsurface irrigation with it, but you might have to filter it not to get it too clogged. But that living water, sweet water, it's really a beautiful thing to do. And I've actually heard there's a company that makes fish manure, and they do like raceway catfish in the southern U.S. And and these catfish are in these raceways, they call them, but they're basically long tanks, let's say. And they have to filter out all the waste from them. And so what do they do with that? They compost it, and so that it doesn't smell at all or anything. And then they have the fish manure. So that's fish manure doesn't smell like fish. So it's the same with the living water. You've got algae. In the tropics, there was one pond I used that in the dry season, it looked like a shamrock shake. Like it was a green milkshake, that water. In the rainy season, it was clear because there was so much water. It was overflowing. The pond was flowing off, and there was just absolutely clear water. So in the half of the year, let's say, it was pretty green, the water. So you would see the difference. And also the rainy season was at the start of planting. So this worked out pretty good because when they're young, they don't need as much nutrition. And also they're not at much threat when they're in vegetative state and they're smaller. The rain isn't a problem. The rain's what makes them grow. But as they start to flower is when the dry season is beginning. So it was actually really perfect growing in the tropics that way because you'd get a lot of your irrigation done by the rain. And then those plants, they don't have flowers. If there's no flowers, there's no molds. There's your bud rot is your concern generally. So they only really have to worry about bud rot the last couple weeks of flowering. They don't, at the beginning of flowering, it's not a problem. And at the end, if it's hot and dry out, beautiful. That's just nice because the dry weather, they're all happy to have dry weather finishing. They don't mind a lot of humidity growing, but dry weather finishing is ideal. So if you can time wet and dry season crops, that you have a crop, you might stagger plants so you have ones finishing throughout the dry season. You don't want to have everything all at once. You need a massive barn to take care of it. But if you could say you have a 10-day curing window or something like that, or 10-day drying window, you might bring them in and have them staggered so that every 10 days you're going to harvest enough to fill up that space, right? So you want to do the logistics of that. Like say you've got room to hang up 10,000 plants. So every 10 days you want to plant 10,000 more. Or if you're planting them all at once, ones that take 60 days, 70 days, 80 days, stagger the cultivars that way and plant them all at once. So there's lots of ways to do the logistics. And that's why the indoors is so popular, is because, especially in places where the weather's crap, but overall it's consistent, right? And a lot of the people in North America today, they've never seen a nice tropical cannabis flower because nobody will grow them indoors. Our great hash plants tend to be from regions where they don't smoke flower. They've been breeding those plants for their hash, So the hash turns out good. They don't smoke it as flower, so they're like me that way. I love growing hash plants for hash. And I might keep some of the flower just for novelty's sake and use it to roll the hash with, so it's varietal joint, So I like to do that, but I only save a few buds from every plant, and then the rest of it I make into hash at home where it's cold. But in a hot, humid climate, it's a terrible place to make hash, and those plants are bred for being consumed as grass, not for hash, typically, So just different way of using cannabis.
Turn up your mics. It's the C word.
So I was just going to ask about your upcoming releases. I've heard a lot with your fans about your Spice of Life adventure mix.
Well, cool. Well, this is kind of a fun one that it's been a long time since there's been a Spice of Life release, really a long time. And in 2025 marks the 30th anniversary since we started selling seeds under Spice of Life, or selling seeds at all. I just shared them before that. And the seeds I had first developed, I had grown outside in Ontario in 94 and had them in the fall of 94. I moved to British Columbia, and then I donated some seeds to a seed seller that was busted. And I said, if you're going to keep selling seeds, I'll donate you some of mine. You can check them out and see what people think. And then I saw the guy a few months later, and he said, oh, everybody loved those seeds. Please keep bringing me seeds. I'll take as many as you can bring, $2 each. So I was like, boy, then I could turn my hobby into my job, because it was really my hobby at that point. I said, if I could get $2 a seed, it's worth setting up some grow rooms to make seed, because I've been collecting and breeding as a hobby already. But if I was selling them at $2 each, that's like 10 times more than a room full of flower was worth by the pound. And that was when flower was still a decent price back then, too. And so I started, and he said, you got to come up with a name, So I remember had a sheet of lined paper, and I'd been getting high and thinking of names for a seed company. And it was fun. I love doing creative things like that. So I went through that sheet, and I made like 2 columns of names on both sides of the paper and had like 100 names. And then I would show, and my favorite was that one when I came up with it, and it was like 72 or somewhere on the list. Like it was down the list, but I said, any of my friends that came over to smoke a joint, I said, look at this, I'm going to make a seed company. What which of these names do you like? You know? And everybody I showed that paper to went, Spice of Life. That's it. That's it. I was like, yeah, I think so too. So we went with that, Spice of Life seeds. And the I've had, number of releases over the years, of course, but after a while, I started making an adventure mix, which was a blend because I was always trying out new stuff. And so say every year, maybe try 100 new things along against my favorites as control plants, I might try them outdoors and indoors and see how they performed. And then, so of those 100 new ones that I was comparing to, I might find 5 or 6 that I'm like, that's a pretty nice plant. I'm not going to work with it, but I'll just let one sit around the edge next time I make a Ruma shishkaberry or a Ruma sweet tooth. So I would have like these one-offs just around the edge, And then when I was cleaning my good seed too, like the primary seed, like whether it was sweet tooth or shishkaberry, you would always have some seeds that didn't look quite as good as the other ones, but were still viable, probably, So I would separate them really good because the ones that got to be, distinct cultivar packages, I wanted all 12 seeds in that pack to be beyond fault, like just perfect examples, perfect specimens. And then if they were, and even in the same type of seeds, I would separate them by like 5 or 6 different screens. So you'd have different size ones. So maybe I say, well, you know what? These small ones, they're all good. They're all nice and dark and ripe, but they're just a little bit smaller than these other ones. And most of them are in the bigger sizes, but there's a few small ones. So I said, well, I'm not going to sell the small ones with them. I'll sell them uniform size so that they would always look all the same size in the bag. And then the ones that were kind of the off levels, where you got some that didn't fit with the major bats, then I would take those off and keep them aside for adventure mix. So I would have either other plants crossed with mine or just kind of funny seed levels of mine or from test batches, that I'd made a test cross and it wasn't enough to make a full release of, but I still liked it. So I'd say, well, I'm going to make a full release of it, but I'll throw the rest of those test batch. I'll just throw that in adventure mix. So I typically kept out because I knew most people would probably try them inside or a temperate climate. So I'd say I won't put any narrow leaf plants in there because I don't want you to get stuck with a 16-week Colombian gold. If you're trying to grow in a closet, you're going to be pissed. This taking up all the room. And then I get these little pencil thin buds. Most of the indoor guys don't want that kind of plant. So I would just use, let's say, temperate or short season types to blend in there and then put that adventure mix out. And it was always like 3 times cheaper than my other packs. So I never sold them retail. To this day, people message me and say, my favorite plant I ever had, I found in your adventure mix. It was the fucking best deal of my life to buy those seeds. I grew that plant for 20 years, but I lost it last year. Do you know what it was? I'm like, how would I know? There were so many things in there, I can't tell you. And sometimes I'll look at it and go, oh, that looks like it was one of the sweet tooth lines or something, but I don't know exactly which one, because it was a pretty diverse selection of stuff. But I'm going to break out for 30th anniversary pack. I'm going to come out with some new seeds in this year. You're going to see some shishkaberry hybrids out as distinct new lines. And then there's going to be adventure mix. So the first one that's going to drop is going to be the new adventure mix. And that's going to have things I've worked on from Colombia and from Thailand, and maybe a few other surprises in there too. So I'm really, really excited to put that out because I know it's such super value. And it's for people that don't care about the hype of having the latest one. A lot of the stuff that's crossed in there is with the latest stuff, so there's going to be some really, really great finds in there for absolute fraction of what you would pay if you were buying some of these things individually, but it's a grab bag. You don't know what you're going to get. and you can call it what you want and give it a new name and do whatever, The adventure mix is fun to play in for everybody. And if you're a new grower, like I could understand a new grower that's, hey, I'm going to try putting 4 plants on my balcony this summer. They don't necessarily want to spend $200 on a pack of seeds that they're going to start in an egg garden and they've never done it before. They're going to start with something that's affordable and that they're still going to find some great genetics in. So it, as long as they can grow their own cherry tomatoes, they can do it. If you can grow cherry tomatoes in a pot on your balcony, you're qualified. So hopefully we can get a lot of new people. I really like getting new people growing. I always find that exciting. And that's why I like sharing seeds when I was breeding it for 5 years as a hobby before Spice of Life. So into this day, I still get excited because I put neighbors onto growing. I've got them growing their first plants and they're using the latest and greatest genetics and having their first crops just blow their mind, like the best weeds they've seen in their life. And they're not, heavy users. Some of them don't even use cannabis. They're just growing it because it's beautiful. And they know that if they hang it up and dry it and put it in jars at Christmas, they give it to their nieces and nephews or, all the adult nieces and nephews. But, they're giving out jars of weed as like just little fun gifts at Christmas. And the people went ballistic because it was really fantastic herb, so it exceeds, under promise and over deliver. Right? So it's actually, well, maybe
That's
you'll get something, maybe
amazing.
you won't. They saw some at so and so's house and said, "Oh, give me a couple next year." So every year I try and get a few trays of clones, and usually I'm very lucky that people always gifted me some to try out in the spring, and I don't have room to try them all in my tiny backyard around the pool. So I'm just happy to have extra clones to share with people up and down the street. Plus, I know that they're not planting males. Like if they're growing seeds and planting males and seeded my backyard, I wouldn't be super happy about that. So I would be very happy to make sure everybody in my neighborhood had free clones so that I knew they were at least planting good stuff. It's fun stuff. And it's such a satisfaction to growing your own compared to buying it. And And people that grow their own tomatoes know that. And lots of people they still do both. They don't need to buy tomatoes in July and August, but, come October, they're buying tomatoes again. So it's not like if you really want to keep trying what's out there, you can go to the store and try new types, at least in Canada, or lots of the States, but we're spoiled for choice nowadays, in places where it's legal, right? But I could honestly say I've never been in a store in my hometown. I've been to one store in Canada since legalization, and that was just because they told me online because I didn't want to go to the stores. A lot of the big producers at the time in Canada years ago and maybe behind closed doors today, but back then they were going on the news going, arrest all these little places like all the mom and pops whose civil disobedience made it legal, that, anyway, I could see how the licensed producers, they're put out because they invest all this overblown amount of money in overblown compliance, but then they get mad at the people that said, no, that's a joke. We're not jumping through all these hoops. They should have just let everybody do it. And so they just go on about doing what they've always done. And then the big companies are out there trying out to have them arrested. You just think that's bad form. It's very ungracious, even if that's what you want, even if you just want them shut down, you shouldn't be calling for the arrest of people who were doing this long before you. It's it's just wrong. So anyway, I call them pro-crim scum. The ones that do that. I put hashtag pro-crim scum when I find them. Ah, But I I love that people get access to more. But I think that as they come to appreciate it, they will start, if they really love it, they'll grow their own. And you think a lot of people won't make their own beer and stuff, but even that's more complicated than growing your own. You can grow your own. It's like having cherry tomatoes isn't as complicated as setting up your own microbrewery in your garage, right? And even if you're an indoor grower, it's still pretty easy. You're still just growing some herbs, It's pretty straightforward. So there's a lot less chance for spoilage. And I'm happy to get people growing their own. To me, that's the highest way to appreciate it. I think anybody that buys cannabis, they might get stoned, but they never really get high until you've had your own, you know? It's a whole other thing, you look at it different, you taste it different, everything's different about it. You're much heightened sense of appreciation for it. And you can also realize when you're looking at buying weed commercially, it's very much about the visual appeal. And a lot of people, we live in a very visual world, everything's an Instagram shot, and that's what's in vogue, and that's cool grown cannabis, cool climate cannabis, short season.
For your parties, what do you recommend for the party season? Like if you did have your families or if there was an environment where you needed to share something, what would you say is a good, because, like you said, not the ones that send you to sleep.
Yeah, you don't need the knockout herbs. I think it's good to have some for that one uncle that is going to think you're soft if you don't. But you gotta, for having some for the newbies, it's about having ones that have a pleasant flavor and a pleasant effect. So I think anything of the haze family or the grapefruit family are nice choices like that. When I say grapefruit family, grapefruit has been shared very widely, and it's the mother of, say, Skittles. Skittles is very popular in the last X amount of 10 years or whatever. But that's what I think of as grapefruit family, is those fruity plants. They remind me of sweet tooth, That when people hand me a joint, I'm like, what is a sweet tooth? No, it's Skittles. Okay. But it's related, and it's through that grapefruit family is the real candy shop, the doorway to candy shop weed. And it's never the strongest ones, but it's satisfying still, but it's not the like, fuck off, we've got the one to knock you out. I'd like to have some of that too. So somebody, oh, this is a sweet fruity weed, it's not that strong. Okay, you want something stronger? Here, roll up something a little heavier for the hardcores. But for most people, if you give them ones that like, wow, that tastes really fruity and smooth and light, you've made their day, and they get a grin out of it, little laughing session, little appetite, It gets their holiday munchies up, so they take them for a walk before the Christmas turkey. They come back and finish the Christmas turkey.
Turn up your mics. It's the C word.
Gosh, thank you so much, Steve,
Anytime.
for joining us today.
Nice chatting with you.
Yes. If you would like to know more information, we will include all of Steve's links in the notes below. Please don't forget to subscribe for updates. And thank you so much for joining us during your holiday season.
Top of the season to you. All right.
Until next time, wishing all of our listeners a very Merry Christmas.
Have a great Christmas.
See you.
Bye.
Bye.
Turn up your mics. It's the C word.